Hello everyone. In this episode, I would like to talk about how time works in transactions. Before we see how time works in a transaction, let's see how it works outside of a transaction. Let's see an example. We execute a select statement and call the now function. And in case you don't know, now function returns current date time. So in this case, it turns out to be whatever you see on a screen. Next, we execute pg sleep for, and this function basically takes 5 seconds, because we passed the 5 seconds here, to execute. That way we know that 5 seconds has been elapsed after the first SQL statement that we executed. Next, we execute the second SQL statement, and here again we are calling a now function, and as you might expect, the value that it returns is different from the value that the first SQL statement returned, right? Because naturally time moves on. As you can see here, in the first result, we have the seconds measuring at 16, and in the second result, it is 23. So, a bit more than 5 seconds. This is natural, this is expected behavior. What might not be expected is that once we put all those SQL statements in a transaction, then the picture changes. Let's see that. First, we start a transaction, and just to repeat ourselves, when you start a transaction, everything that follows that begin statement is part of that transaction. Okay. So here we have the same SQL statements, and let's see what the results they return. So first SQL statements, when we execute, it gives us, well, current date time, whatever that turned out to be. Then we execute the second SQL statement, so we wait for 5 seconds, and then we execute the third one. And the third one, surprisingly, returns the same value as the first one. As you can see here, those two values, the first one and the second one, are exactly the same. So why is that? The reason for that is that time in transactions is frozen. It doesn't progress. Okay? And this is not a glitch. This is an intended behavior. So let's spend a bit more time, try to understand why it was designed like this. Okay? So we know that transaction consists of one or more SQL statements, right? And those SQL statements naturally gonna be executed at different point in time. So let's say first execute your first statement, then you execute the second one, then maybe you did some processing in your application, so let's say 2 seconds passed, then you execute your third one, right? So execution time, like when you execute the statements in a transaction, is different, right? But one of the idea of a transaction is that it takes all the SQL statements, that part of it, and glues them together. So it sort of simulates, it makes it look like that they are one single thing. Okay? Even though they are multiple, obviously, multiple SQL statements, and even though they execute at a different point in time, one of the goals of a transaction is to take such statements and make it feel like, make it look like a single thing. So sort of to glue all those statements together. And as we know, single thing in real life happens at a single time, right? So you cannot have a one event that happens multiple times, right? One event happens at a one time. So that's why, to make all those statements that you have in transaction feel like they are one thing, that's why transaction time in transaction is frozen. Okay. Also, there are some cases when we want to get a real date time, so current time that the machine that the PostgreSQL is running has, right? And there is such function. It is called the clock timestamp, and when we access that function, if you are in transaction or outside of transaction, you will always get current date time. Okay, so as you can see here, this date time is measures the seconds at 7, right? And here we have a 13, so roughly a bit more than 5 seconds, right? Another thing that we need to mention is that this date time, this is the start time of a transaction. So when a transaction starts, that time, that moment is then later on used as a date time for all the functions that you use to access the time, right? So one of the functions, such function is, for example, now. Okay, so that was all I want to share about the time. In the starting from the next episodes, we will talk about ACID properties of a database transaction. So that's for now, and thank you very much, and hope to see you in the next one.